Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. As you heard, my name is Salimul Haq. I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development here at the Independent University of Bangladesh. And it's a great pleasure to be asked to chair this session, which is on the Indo-Pacific, Resilient Indo-Pacific, climate change, environmental and ecological degradation, and their impacts on security. We have a number of very distinguished speakers who will be presenting full papers, and then we have a number of discussants, as you just heard. I'm going to slightly reverse the order of presentation and invite Mr. Muhammad Muzahidul Islam from Auburn University in the US, who is online from the US and has asked to come early so he can go off to take an exam. So, Mujahidul, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. Go ahead. Please proceed.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening of the midnight. All the participants, welcome to our presentation. And I'm thanking eminent Professor Dr. Salimul Haq for giving me a chance to present my paper. So actually the climate change impacts and the prospects is a huge. It's quite impossible to just discussion within a very short time. So some of our thoughts I am just going to share. And the idea is to discussing about the current and the future effects of the climate change in Bangladesh and the Indo-Pacific region, and the possible solutions to combat the climate crisis. So climate of this universe is interconnected. So whatever we are doing here is actually impacting the other regions. It's well known and well documented. And it also known that the climate change impact in the congested cities and the desert is not the same. So it impacts different places differently in terms of geophysical and geological settings also. And the Indo-Pacific region is vitally important for different resources, for food security, as well as economic development. And without considering the climate change impacts in the Indo-Pacific region, it would be an unattained dream to occur in the Indo-Pacific activities. So demarcation of the Indo-Pacific region, it actually, rather than the administrative or any activities, it's going beyond the the mental map, from the stretching from the coast of the US towards the Australia and the full ocean of Indian Ocean, as well as the Pacific Ocean. And around 24 nations with 300 crore populations are dealing with this region. And the most vulnerable part of this Indo-Pacific region is the coastal part of the Bangladesh, as well as it's also impacting the other sides of Bangladesh as well. The another one is the blue economy and the ecological integrity of the region for the climate change impact. This research actually done by the satellite image processing, analysis, and the modeling for the future changes. And some simplification of graphs also uses for understanding what actually climate change impacts are dealing with the another subsequent natural disasters, as well as the quasi-natural disasters, which is coupled the natural and human activities. It also uses the pre-studies graphs and figures. And now this nice figure has been taken from the Gazette et al. And his team is conducting research considering all the Indo-Pacific disasters from 1980 to 2018. It shows that the darker side, it's much more vulnerable due to earthquake as well as the typhoon. And this buffering zone full coast is also suffering from different type of hydrometeorological disasters like cyclone, river flooding, as well as for Bangladesh, salinity and river erosion also a very important and significant distracting disasters. So not only disasters, but also this Indo-Pacific region is vibrant economical, going through the vibrant economical development and the region of the different type of species, diversity, and most importantly, the almost half of the human capital of this universe is living in these places. So frequency of the cyclone in Bangladesh in the Indo-Pacific, if we go through it, with time being, the death rate is reduced, which is showing in the red line graph. But the maximum wind speed of the cyclone is increasing with time, and 2020 it shows the highest almost. Surge height also changing with time. So whatever it says in terms of the disaster management initiatives for considering the death, but the loss of the ecosystem as well as loss of the economical issues of the coastal part is higher, and it sometimes say that more than 20 to 30 times bigger than this time, the earlier times. In considering the Indo-Pacific region cyclone category 3 and more, it's showing the increasing trend. It increasing with time and magnitude and the intensity also. So how actually climate change impacting the cyclone formation? The cyclone formation is also called the cyclogenesis, and sometimes it's also referred that the generating the cyclonic eye. So for understanding, it uses very simple graph. What is the actually the condition after a global temperature rising to 1 degree centigrade? Just considering this portion of this is the coastal part of the Bangladesh, around 500 kilometer, considering a block with different temperature, like 25, 26, and so on and so forth. So considering that all 5 factors is constant for just for this case, and only considering that sea level temperature 26 degrees centigrade or more can gain the energy for creating the cyclonic eye. And since it is more 26 or more than 26, these 4 portions is now can gain the energy for generating cyclonic eye. For the situation 2, that means scenario 2, we are considering the global temperature rise just 1 degree centigrade. Again, this block with different temperatures, now this 25 is increased to the 26, so on and so forth. And it is clearly shown that now the 8 cyclonic eye generation is capable, and they are generating energy to be a much more dense cyclone, which can lead towards the land part. So even though all phenomena is the same, just rising 1 degree global temperature can make the intensity and the magnitude of the cyclone it's much more higher. Another one is found in this not only Bangladesh but also in the Pacific different coastal facing regions. The sea level intrusion, which is the impact is huge. To understanding how the seawater intrusion in the coastal area, I'm going for a small video.
Our community is facing, we must go deep underground. Here at several hundred feet below the Earth's surface, the groundwater that people in the Soquel Creek Water District use is stored between rocks and sand. Rainfall seeps into the groundwater aquifers and slowly flows underground to the ocean, or returns to the surface as a spring or directly into a river before reaching the ocean. The freshwater underground creates a buffer near the shore where freshwater and salty ocean water meet. When wells draw more water out of the ground than is naturally replenished by rain, groundwater levels begin to drop. Salty ocean water moves inland and mixes with the fresh groundwater. groundwater moves inland, wells that once drew fresh drinking water become salty and unusable.
So I'm going to pause this video now. So what actually happens in the coastal,
Near the
and for the coastal area of Bangladesh also, since the surface water is already saline, the peoples are intaking the groundwaters, and rather than replenishing the groundwater from the natural systems, too much stagnant groundwater also is attracting the seawater from this side, as well as the upstream flow which is coming over. And since that it will balance or make a buffer zone in this area for Bangladesh in this place. But when the upstream flow from the Ganga, Brahmaputra and Meghna, that means the GBM basin, is much more lower during the winter season at different times, the seawater will include to go through this upperland. And it also said that in the last years, around 40,000 people just hospitalized due to sudden diarrhea in the Borishal region. It also, case study also recorded that premature birth increased significantly due to high BP for taking saline water, their household and all activities. And coupled with the sea level rise and the lower upstream flow can make another significant problems for destroying or extincting Sundarban, which is an existential challenge for this region. So what actually the existing mitigation measures and the pitfalls just this time is considering Bangladesh, but I believe this is also representing the subcoastal side of the India as well as the several other South Asian countries. So the major destruction of the green barrier, that means Sundarban, which is protecting us from the different magnitude cyclones, is first hit the Sundarban area, then reduce the intensity, community can withstand with it. But the great destruction has occurred the British colonization era. It was almost 26,000 hectare square kilometer area was Sundarban, but nowadays around 10,000 less than 10,000 square kilometer area is Sundarban. So protection of the earlier time is higher than nowadays. In the COVID-19 situation, when I was in Bangladesh, I went there immediately after the cyclone Amphan. The geotextile bags, what actual protection measures and what is the current condition. We saw that the geotextile bag, which is frequently used for protecting our coastal dams, actually it's not protecting our coastal sites because the cycle intensity as well as the different parameter has changes a lot. So it is another pitfall, the unstable earthen dam embankment. As well as we also ran another study. The engineers said that most of the time they are not considering the climate change issues nowadays. And again, a much more robust research is required in this area. So possible solution actually is a tentative, and it's not possible to exactly figure out all the Indo-Pacific areas problems and solutions in a week. It's just a tentative, and every local based solution is much more fruitful rather than the global and one scenario. But what we can do in the Indo-Pacific collaboration protective measures is the reducing carbon dioxide emissions in all possible way and take some initiative for resolving transboundary unsustainable issues like the upstream water issue and so on and so forth. The indigenous measures are the key. The communities who are living with the disaster have sometimes much more knowledge rather than just studying from the outside. And it is also shown that the scientific capacity building of the local community much more fruitful rather than imposing the other country's model into any coast, as well as the structural measures and civil engineering measures like the plantation and using the different type of social capitals. So it's time to wrap up for the short session. And if we say something, we are thinking in the Pacific but not considering climatic technology, again, it will be an unattained dream. So with proper consideration of the climatic issues is the key for the development of the Indo-Pacific regional activities as well as the collaborative activities. The another thing is the partnership activities should be up ensuring climatic sustainability into the all sections. And the coastal communities sustainability is the key for the sustainable collaboration. Community who are living in the coast and what is the facing for transportation as well as marine resources, the coastal communities engagement is the most important issue as well as challenge too. So here is some of the paper cuts I am going through very shortly. The impacts of the infectious disease and mental health also creating by the due to salinity as well as the COP26 summits sometimes say cyclone and salty water are the threat. Those omens are finding solutions. And another paper cut is saying about the climate change in Bangladesh as well as salinity affects peoples and agriculture in Bangladesh. So coastal cities are the mortality in the climate front lines. And now I'm going for a questioning session if they have any.
Thank you very much, Mujahidul, for that excellent presentation. We'll move forward now with the second presentation, which is going to be by Dr. Ahmadul Islam, who's the Deputy Director of the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies here at IUB. His paper is entitled Bangladesh's Efforts at Adaptation and What More Needs to be Done for Sustainable Disaster Recovery. Ahmadul Islam. Please.
Yes, sir. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chair of this thematic session 2, very distinguished panelist, presenter, and delegates, welcome to my presentation on Bangladesh efforts at adaptation and what more needs to be done for sustainable disaster recovery. Globally, the recent changes in the climate system are unparalleled in hundreds to millennia. Human-caused climate change already affects numerous weather and climatic extreme globally. So, very recent report produced by IPCC claimed that climate change is already affecting every inhabitant regions across the globe, human influence contributing to may observe changes in the weather and climate extremes. The United Nations Development Programme recently produced an estimate that a report in 2020 alone, 980 disasters caused by natural hazards cost the globally economy over USD 2.10 billion USD. In particular, disaster recovery cost the world is 77 poorest countries an average of 29 billion annually. So, Bangladesh ranks 7th top disaster-affected country in the world and 2nd top in Asia. In this regard, the sustainable adaptation to climate change and sustainable disaster recovery options are crucial. But the key argument of my paper is this: despite great advances, a lack of access to current knowledge, contemporary technology, and technological assistance results in a wide gap between the amount of demand and actual capacity for conducting efficient adaptive activities. So the methodology, this working paper that I followed, this is actually, I go through the panel data. Panel data is one is emergency management database that is 1972 to 2018 for analysis the vulnerability. And the panel data from the Bangladesh Climate Change Task Fund. So we collected data from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, so 2009 to 2018. And to identify the gap, so we analyzed that bibliometric review. So we use the Scopus database 2006 to 2021. So in the right graph that you will find the bibliometric review result. So if we go through the publication that's recorded in the Scopus database between 2006 to 2021, that we will found that most of the database that's focus on the climate change adaptation and infrastructure development aspects. And also, they also focus on the thing is climate change adaptation research and knowledge. But the gap is, the mostly we are talking about this a comprehensive disaster management, which is very much crucial for climate change adaptations, that is very much neglected in over this period of time. These one actually produced this graph based on the data from the emergency management database. That's the global trend of disaster occurrence and vulnerability. We know that the world reported between 1970 to 2018 more than 13,000 disaster events, of which more than 5,000, 40% took place in the Asia and the Pacific. So that's we call the Indo-Pacific. So what's actually occurs in the Asia? Occurrence of natural disaster events in Asia by sub-regions, loss and damage, that Southern Asia has experienced the highest number of disasters in this during the period of time. It's about more than 1,700. And in Bangladesh alone, it's called 308 disaster events took place in Bangladesh between 1970 to 2018. And the world economic cost for this disaster is 3.3 trillion, whereas Asia lost almost 2 trillion, and Bangladesh lost almost 2 billion. So what's the intervention actually government have done in Bangladesh? We know we are the very much pioneer about the adaptation activities, so we call the climate champion. So what actually done? So Bangladesh government established in climate change trust fund from our own budget in 2009, which called the Bangladesh Trust Fund. So till to date, a total of 450 million USD has been allocated to this fund from fiscal year 2009 to 10 to 2018 to 2019. So far, 625 projects for a total $4.40 million have been undertaken, with where this 282 project already have finished. But if we categorize this thing under 6 adaptation activities, that mostly this project is about our infrastructure activities. So what actually we have received from the foreign assistance. So I particularly focused in our foreign assistance from the state government, from the US state government. That's we found that 2001 to 2021, that if you the right graph that we found in 2001, it's about like that 120 million USD that we have received as assistance from the state government, and it's actually increasing exponentially up to 2021. It's about like that 400 million USD. But what actually disbursement happened in our actual general environment protection and what I say humanitarian activities and emergency response. If you see that in the right table, the 2015 to 2017, actually this fund is mostly distributed in general environmental protection. But after that, actually the fund is increasing to distribute in the humanitarian activities and emergency response. So the gap is here. So what actually have needed till to date in 2021, we have received more than what did I say 3 billion USD from the 334 billion USD from State Department, and we have more than 180 activities. But if in the context of environment protections and humanitarian humanitarian activities ground, it's only very few activity have done. So here is very crucial to do the adaptation activities in this ground. So US government need much more give attention rather than give the health and activities. So give attention to the climate change adaptation and environmental protection issues. So what's our government is a very big intervention that have done over the time. So we know that we have some very big policy document that's produced that which also needed actually related to our adaptation activities. First one is Bangladesh Delta Plan. We are Delta-based country. Our 33% of our geographical land is coastal belt. So this Delta Plan is really huge vision for us. So our government also took the one very good adaptation plan. It's called the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. This plan also lead to the actually our dream to become a developed country in 2041. So we have Bangladesh Perspective Plan and National Adaptation Program for Action, such as NAPA, and also we have the Local Adaptation Plan of Action, which actually we have developed based on the different donor support. But what actually have done in the field? So positive ecological and infrastructure environment. We know that recently 1,743 square kilometer of the Bay of Bengal adjacent to the St. Martin Island, the government declared St. Martin Marine Protected Area to conserve marine biodiversity, which is really very big initiative that's done by our government in the adaptation activities. So what actually done in the infrastructure item? So government already taken the constructed different infrastructure activities. The most of that's in the Chittagong, that is 15.2 kilometer long Chattogram Marine Drive, which will protect actually our national economic hub, which is called the Chattogram City Corporation. So government also taken the huge decisions, which is related to the green green energy. This government can sell 10 coal-based power facilities, which owe $12 billion in foreign investment. So transition to renewable energy, Bangladesh set a target by 2041 to have 40% of its energy from renewable sources. So these all are the very crucial initiative that's done by the government, which we'll see the result in the near future. So here is the index. So we should think about the scientifically what's actually have done. So our government has a lot of positive things. Yes, we have government done. We also know, but what actually in the index store. So this is called the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Index Bangladesh profile. If you see this profile, our position is very alarming. So in the index, our position is 164, but if you see in our is totally red. So the high vulnerability score and low readiness score Bangladesh places it in the upper left quadrant of the Notre Dame Index. It has both a great need of investment and innovation to improve readiness and a great urgency of actions. Bangladesh is the 26th most vulnerable country and 24th least ready country. So this least readiness is about talking adaptations. So this is actually our status in 2021. So what actually I propose today? So this is actually model that's I prepared from my PhD degree. So this is called the effective sustainable disaster recovery model. So the philosophy of this sustainable disaster recovery model has been constructed under the Build Back Better principle. In addition, the theoretical connotation influenced by the notable scholar that's called Smith and Wenger, conceptualization of sustainable disaster recovery. The starting point of this model, interaction between disaster event and coping responses. The nature of coping responses depending on hazards effect in the inherent adaptive capacity of the community. We know that if in any disaster event, so it is spiritually and culturally, we draw some coping responses. But the thing is what actually have done. So if it is called the reduced disaster vulnerability, just for give the humanitarian assistance, but if we would like to see that it's broadly, that's called the greater community resiliency, which actually lead to the sustainable adaptation and sustainable disaster recovery. So in the long term, we call that this both combination is needed. So in the next stage, in the building stage. So building stage, actually we are thinking about the 4 items. It's the physical structure, infrastructure, and social structure, and environmental structure. So all these 4 structures in the recovery stage, that's which is actually called in the philosophy that pre-event plan and post-event action. So in the pre-event plan, in the climate change adaptations, and all 4 items need to be the most sustainable. So in this regard, I propose that if we would like to do more sustainable adaptation and sustainable climate change adaptation programs, then we have needed to focus on the bottom-up approach. So here I focus on the community participation is needed and how actually this community participation ensure I figure out the 11 items, 11 reasons behind this. If we concern this, that community participation will ensure. In the better stage, if you would like to, if all these things align, then our adaptive capacity will be ensured. If our adaptive capacity is level of high, then our sustainable disaster recovery will ensure. If our adaptive capacity is low, that our sustainable disaster recovery is not possible. So far, that if in any disaster that we found that even in the Isla, in our southern area, that after 10 years, if we go to visit them, you will still find them, they are not recovered at all. So the concern is we should invest more in the sustainable disaster recovery. We should invest more in the adaptation activities. If we do this, then in our future, hopefully our index, that our position would be high. Thank you so much for listening to me, and thank you so much for giving the opportunity.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation and analysis that you've done, Imadul Islam. Let me now invite our third paper presenter to come up and present, Dr. Ms. Marufa Akhtar. She'll be presenting on securing the Bay of Bengal regional security perspective in the era of climate change. Marufa.
I'm sorry, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Salimul Haq, for giving me the floor. I'm Subaita Fairuz. Marufa Akhtar couldn't be here today.
Apologies.
She suddenly became ill. So.
Oh dear, I'm very sorry to hear that. Subaita, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so before I begin, I just want to say this paper is a work in progress, and this is the first draft. So I want to first talk about why talking about regional security in the era of climate change is significant. It's because there have been several warnings from climate change experts and environmental science scholars who have said that environmental security in the Bay of Bengal region has rarely been on the agenda of the states. And even when they have been, they have not, been combined with ecological security. And so we want to basically talk about how we are combining that environmental security, ecological security with human security in this paper. So the main objective of the study is to redefine what regional security should mean for the states in the Bay of Bengal region in this era of climate change. The focus previously when we talk about security studies has been on military security, and the discourses have predominantly been very state-centric. Even though human security has been taken into account, the threat to human lives and livelihoods and the environment due to climate change has not been viewed through a regional security lens. Now, for the purposes of this study, the regional security concept as redefined by Sanjay Chaturvedi and Vijay Sakuja has been used. Now, the study is predominantly qualitative in nature, and information has been collected at the moment from secondary data sources, but primary research also might be carried out in the future. Okay, so for the Bay of Bengal region, obviously has a very rich history because of its strategic location, and that has ensured that it remains a key player in global geopolitics. Now, the Bay sustains 37% of Asia's population. It has a growing GDP, and many countries like India, China, and even Bangladesh have trade routes in this region. However, given that the issue of climate change is compounded through developmental and economic activities, when studying this region, the transboundary nature of climate change should be taken into account. When mapping the Bay has generally been concerned with physical and material resources and geographies, what is also of paramount interest today is to explore the details of human ecological cultural geographies so as to determine what kind of challenges people in this region might face due to climate change. So we need to study environmental impacts on human lives and livelihoods more in depth instead of dealing with environmental issues separately and human lives and livelihood issues separately. So first, I will define the concept of regional security and how in this paper we have redefined this concept. Now, previously, the focus of regional security complex has been to deal with the state and its political and military resources or sectors. And the important thing is that this theory brings to the forefront the importance of the regional level in international security studies. Now, whether or not to locate environmental issues within the broader national security paradigm is a very debated topic. The stronger argument is in support of locating environmental security in the wider framework of human security because state-centric approaches are inadequate and as such equity and impacts are not stopped by state lines. Therefore, in redefining this regional security concept, one or two states in the region will not be able to bring about the required changes. Their military, despite its organization, will not be able to bring about climate change mitigations. And human security issues now need to become central concerns in the regional security aspect. The Bay of Bengal region, when we talk about it, and when we talk about regional security here, we are not just talking about South Asia or Southeast Asia or East Asia. There are many different states from all of these different regions of the world who have vested interest in the Bay of Bengal. The ecosystem and natural resources of the Bay transcends these state boundaries and call for regional and sub-regional cooperation and a shift in the outdated view of geography and politics. Now, the other thing that has most often slipped under the radar is the considerations of equity, differential vulnerability, and the different adaptive capacity of the various communities surrounding the Bay of Bengal region, including obviously the coastline regions. Not all communities are equally vulnerable, and not all of them have similar levels of adaptability in the face of climate change. So we need to focus in these differential vulnerabilities and differential adaptabilities if we are going to move forward and protect them instead of coming up with general solutions and general policy recommendations. So now I will move on to the next section and talk more in depth about the kind of climate change evidences we are seeing in the Bay of Bengal region and the effects. So these were some of the images. Obviously, cyclones are increasing, as previous presenters have talked about, and the intensity, the frequency, and these threaten to displace people, and these cause fatalities. Next, the intensity of floods in the Ganga and Brahmaputra basin, which already sustains some of the world's poorest people, is also expected to increase, and it is projected that almost 125 million people will become homeless, out of which 75 million of them will be from Bangladesh. At the same time, deforestation have caused a warming of the environment, especially when fossil fuels are used for electricity generation, and also leads to the emission of greenhouse gases. It is noted how the world's oceans also act as heat sinks, and this leads to the rise of global ocean temperatures. And these oceans are also acting as carbon dioxide sinks, and 1/3 of the carbon dioxide is absorbed by them. This raises the acidity levels of the oceans. And all these minute changes, whether it be temperature or the acidity, is going to affect the marine ecosystem in the long term. Now, while more natural resources are being discovered in the Bay of Bengal, concerns are arising regarding how these will be extracted and what kind of adverse effects it may have on the people living in the coastline regions. Whether these will have long-term or short-term benefits also needs to be explored, and otherwise, short-term benefits might result in long-term problems for this region. Already the lives and livelihoods of the people are threatened due to scarcity of resources, water scarcity being one of them. And then there is a scarcity of fish in fisheries now. Now, fisheries sustain some of the people living in poverty or below the poverty line, and so their main sources of income are getting depleted. What happens then? So, meanwhile, there are also, so these are just the list, and regarding other regional security issues, there is an increase of trafficking, smuggling, movement of illegal drugs. So these are all increasing because climate change is a threat multiplier. And there is already scarcity of resources, intensity of cyclones, intensity of floodings increasing, and all of these will ultimately lead to migration of people, large amounts of them. And when migration occurs, the risk of violence also increases. Now, the Syrian War is often cited as an example that the civil conflict there was exacerbated by these kind of climate change-induced pressures. And social and cultural conflicts or frictions increasing in a region like the Bay of Bengal, where there are so many ethnicities, cultures, and religious groups, can lead to devastating effects on the region's security and to the security of many of these states if climate change is not mitigated on a regional level. So this has led to some policy recommendations, the first of which is that we need to improve governance in the region. And obviously there are some talks about hegemonic power being important to maintain this governance, but well, that remains to be seen. And then we talk about the developing strategies for sustainable use and management of the natural resources, doing more studies and not just extracting new resources whenever we find them. Then we have educating the vulnerable communities on climate change and its effect. This is perhaps the most important because deforestation activities are conducted most often by these communities, and they are unaware of the long-term problems associated with these things. And then there is improving cooperation between states to develop renewable energy resources. So we talk about cross-border energy trade between the South Asian countries of Bhutan, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. So we are alleviating the pressure on fossil fuels and all of that. Then obviously develop and promote nature-based solutions to protect communities and wildlife. The Sundarbans often make a natural barrier to the tropical storms. It is important for reforestation, to stop landslides, to act as natural barriers to tropical cyclones and such, and floods. So all of those things are important. And also, lastly, to recognize climate change as a human security issue and putting it in the regional security paradigm. And that is where I will end the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Subaita, for that excellent presentation. That brings us to the end of our 3 designated papers. We will now move on to the discussion section where we have 4 discussants, designated discussants, and I'll invite firstly Mr. Iqbal Abdul Haroon, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, to make his remarks. Mr. Haroon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salimul Haq, I'm pleased to be here in the same podium with you and other panelists and discussants. I see Dr. Gohar Nisa is there. Assalamu alaikum, sir. Before I get into the topic, I want to start with some of the discussion. Brought several issues on our challenges in terms of addressing climate change issues. And those are all valid and those are realities. So now, I think that it is expected from me that I should be bringing the perspective of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. If that is the case, then I'll try to highlight some of the activities that we are doing, some of the challenges that we feel, and how I can also address that what are the main issues that we are facing in terms of discharging our duties. First, in terms of the policy formulation, I think Bangladesh is quite well prepared in terms of the policies. We have BCC SAP 2009 and we are updating that. We have a final version with us that will be publishing soon. As one of the participants said, we have our climate prosperity plan where we are trying to work on that. We are thinking that isolated sector-wise program can lead to kind of conflict. So we are trying to have a green growth strategy. So that covers all the sectors that are in the process of developing Bangladesh. We have high demand for everything because we have high population. Again, doing that, we need to extract nature. We need to resort to the nature so that obviously we end up exploiting a little bit of nature in every work that we do. We have got a high trajectory, growth trajectory, and our development is also is quite high compared to our neighboring and other countries. That implies that we are resorting to the nature for feeding our high population that we need to feed, and they need to have their livelihood from the nature. So those are the issues. Again, we are not in a position to mitigate the climate change, but we are trying to have a national adaptation plan, and we are discussing this plan, the current version, to every level so that we can get perspective from all the stakeholders that how can we make it more effective in terms of adaptation. As this has been discussed, that we are trying to focus on the renewable energy so that we can reduce our dependency on the natural sources. As this also has been mentioned, I'm happy to see that people are noticing that government is working, and we, under the Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, we took 800 projects, and again, those are, many of them are infrastructure projects, because those are the needs that we get from the fields. One issue is what we are losing constantly is the biodiversity, because biodiversity is the heart of the nature, but we are losing it because of the, as I said, that because of the our activities, and we don't notice biodiversity in many places. But once one biodiversity is lost, it will never come back. So ultimately, those are impacting that change in the climate. I should say that it's not climate change; it's a climate crisis, because we cannot call it any more climate change. Because climate change could be a positive thing as well. But in our case, I think it is a challenge. So we should take it as a crisis. Now coming to the financing of the activities, climate crisis or climate change. Financing is always is scarce, and it is, I think, the most scarce for climate change area or environmental issues, because the polluters are reluctant to contribute to that. Rather, they are making things difficult for those who are managing it in a sustainable way. So, climate financing. For financing, we need to find ways that how can we finance those activities that government is trying to implement. As I mentioned, that we have several plans, but again, finance will remain in the center of our discussion. Today's topic is pretty wide. We can interpret in many ways, but I think everybody has got their own ways. From my side, from government, I think in terms of development, this ministry needs to be a cross-cutting ministry, because every development activity is taking place under different ministries need to be coordinated better, so that while we are developing, we should be careful and responsive to the need of the climate change or environmental issues that are on the ground. So with this, I think at this stage, I would like to thank you for inviting me and giving me the chance to share the realities that we are facing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Harun, for those excellent comments on behalf of the Ministry of Environment. I have been informed by Ambassador Tariq Karim that our chief guest, Dr. Gohar Rizvi, has joined us. I believe he's with us online. Or has he left? There he is. Gohar bhai, Assalamu alaikum. I understand that you may have to leave us soon, so I've been asked to give you the floor now so you can make your remarks, and then if you need to leave us, you can leave us. You need to unmute.
Okay, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Thank you very, very much. I believe there was some confusion with the change of time. I was told my session was at 11:20 UK time. And with that in view, I had made another appointment for 12:15. So I'm really, really sorry if this has inconvenienced you and made things difficult for you.
No, not at all. Please go ahead. You have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It is always, first let me apologize for the inconvenience that this has probably caused to all of you. But also to say that I am truly, truly very, very delighted to be with you this morning in this very, very important conversation. I don't know if my good friend, the Honorable Member of Parliament, Saber Chaudhry, is there or not. If he's there, I want to wish him my greetings and salams. Also, I really do want to thank the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal Studies Center at the Independent University for asking me once again to their conferences. I have been involved with this organization. To say from the inception would be understating. In fact, even prior to its inception, I greatly admire the extraordinary work, energy, vision, and academic rigor that Ambassador Tariq Karim has put into making a great success of the center. I congratulate him and I thank him for giving me this opportunity to be with you. May I also take this opportunity to thank the Independent University of Bangladesh for their vision of setting up this center at the university. I cannot overemphasize the importance of Bay of Bengal region to Bangladesh and to our relations with our neighbors, and therefore this very timely initiative on the part of the university is much appreciated. I thank the Vice Chancellor, the Chairman of the Board of Trustees, and so on. Also, I want to thank the American Embassy in Dhaka for supporting this conference, without which, of course, it would not have been possible to bring such a distinguished group of people together. Obviously, as you know, I have not been able to attend all of the conference today, but I did go through the agenda, and it seemed to me that is an extraordinarily planned agenda, and it has really covered the main themes of the importance of creating an open, resilient, interconnected Bay of Bengal area as very, very important to us, and therefore, and what we need really is much more knowledge of the subject. There has been not sufficient academic focus on this region. The information that we gather and that comes to us from different sources have not been as much as helpful as could have been. And it is in this context that I want to encourage the center to take more empirical research so that it can add to our knowledge and understanding of the region. I also understand that this is what is happening today in Dhaka is a second phase of a related conference that earlier took place in Sri Lanka. And although, once again, I was not there, so I don't know what is happening, but the fact that these have been back to back in itself shows the importance that all of us attach to the Bay of Bengal region. Last but not least, this conference comes at the same time as Boomstech summit that also took place in Colombo in the last few days, and where the theme of Boomstech summit was not very different from it. So what I'm really trying to say is this, that there's enormous interest and focus in the region, and this is obviously very encouraging. As I said earlier on, our knowledge base still remains rather thin, and hopefully not only the conference, but the more sustained research that will take place will enable us to get to grips with it better. Also, very, very interestingly for me, and I will focus my comments more on Indo-Bangladesh, US-Bangladesh relations in this context, rather than the Bay of Bengal itself. But this year, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh's diplomatic relationship with Bangladesh and the United States. in these 50 years, the US has been a very important ally and supporter of Bangladesh, although there still exists some feelings from 1971 about the role of the United States. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding as to whether United States had actually opposed or had been less than helpful in our liberation struggle. The reality of the matter is that now the documents of that period are available, the United States had and did support our liberation effort. But their public position was constrained by the fact of their own interest in developing and opening up a relationship with China, in which Pakistan was playing a very important role. And in order not to upset Pakistan, the United Nations, on the official side, at least insofar as the White House was concerned, they had appeared to be less friendly. But as I said earlier, and I repeat, that is only a partial reading of it. Behind the scene, the United States supported our efforts, and not only the government, but also the people of the United States in a way that is very difficult to overemphasize. As Ambassador Tariq Karim has often reminded us, that our diplomatic relationship with the United States predates our relationship with the people of the United States. And that relationship, I think, continues to be harnessed, harbored, so that we can take fuller advantage of it. Let me now talk the few things that are on my mind today. While we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of our diplomatic relationship, we have come a long way. Bangladesh has really come a long way from those days. But one asks ourselves, while we have so much in commonality with the United States, we are a shared democracy. Bangladesh is a Muslim majority, a liberal democratic society. We continue to share with the United States a shared concern for most of the major global questions. The question is why that relationship has not realized its full potential as yet. We have a good relationship. United States has always been generous to Bangladesh, and we are all grateful to the United States for their assistance, which has enabled us to move a long way and to show to the world that Bangladesh is, while it is truly was a test case for development, it has overcome that and given hope to the rest of the world that with effort, with planning, with policies in place, a country can make good on its commitment. Today, there have been, as I said, my main concern is why is it that Bangladesh and United States have not been able to realize the full potential despite our commonalities. In the first place, I think it is important for our friends in the United States is to understand that we are a new country. Although we have celebrated our golden jubilee, compared to the United States of 300 years of democracies, ours is a fledgling democracy. We are still building our institutions. We are still trying to strengthen democratic processes, develop a democratic culture, and so forth. What we need is an empathetic understanding of Bangladesh's problems and positions. And this is best done through engagement, through closer cooperation, through studying and understanding each other's perspectives and needs better. Sanctions do not help. It unfortunately simply muddies the problem. I am not arguing that some of the things for which Bangladesh has been criticized is to be dismissed lightly. Those things are there, they remain in place, and we are obviously trying to overcome our own problems. But I repeat and I urge that we engage in discussion, we engage in understanding each other's perspectives, and come forward with a helping hand so that we can solve these problems together and in a comparative manner. The other thing I want to emphasize today is that although in Bangladesh we study the United States, large number of our scholars are engaged in studying U.S. foreign policy, security, domestic issues, etc. There is a dearth of scholarship on Bangladesh in American universities. There is, to my knowledge, not a single center in any American university devoted to the study of Bangladesh. There are few, to my knowledge, visiting American scholars in Bangladesh studying the situation in Bangladesh. Why I am saying all this in somewhat random manner is to say, because of the lack of knowledge, because of the understanding of the complexities of our society, we are very much left and dependent on media reporting, which is often uninformed, often biased, and often reflects one perspective rather than the other. So today, in anticipation of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of our relationship with the United States, I would urge our universities and the universities in the United States to set up dedicated research center to encourage exchange of scholarship, and so that there is a better understanding between the two countries, and our relationship can really achieve the potentials that has always existed but never been fully realized. I do not want to, as you can see, I have not addressed many of the concerns, the questions of Bay of Bengal. As I said earlier, these have been done by other scholars who have presented papers today. My focus has been on the US, and therefore I won't go back into the areas that are the primary concerns of this conference today. With those words, I once again thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk to you, and to wish you all the success in the conference, and hope that as a result of this conference, a better and deeper understanding between the two countries will develop, which will enable us to work together both within Bangladesh and in the international world. Thank you very, very much for giving me this moment, and I apologize again because of the timing confusion. I have to run along to another meeting, but thank you so much. Thank you all. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gahor Rizvi, for those excellent remarks, particularly the focus on how we improve better understanding between the US and Bangladesh going forward. Now let us return to the remaining discussants of this session. It's my pleasure to invite now Mr. Muhammad Khan, Deputy Director, Office of Economic Growth at USAID Bangladesh. Mr. Khan, do you want to do it from there? Please, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Salimul Haq. His Excellency Professor Dr. Gahor Rizvi, Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister, His Excellency Mr. Sabir Hussain Chaudhry, MP, Chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee of Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change, Bangladesh Parliament, Ambassador Mashbi Shams, Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Ambassador Tariq Karim. Session Chair, Dr. Salimul Haq, distinguished panel members, and also distinguished guests and participants. Good afternoon, good evening, and Shubho Aparanno, Assalamu Alaikum. The US and Bangladesh has a long-standing and growing partnership in addressing climate change. We appreciate Bangladesh's leadership, Climate Vulnerable Forum, and for calling on all major emitters to make emissions reductions commitments. Bangladesh's graduation from least developed country status is a significant milestone. Bangladesh's ambition to become a developed nation can be furthered if Bangladesh can address climate risks and stressors. USAID is committed to support the development goals of Bangladesh, and we seek to build capacity of the country as part of the US government's Indo-Pacific vision. As we are all aware, climate change is growing even more severe, especially in the Pacific region, as South Asia's glaciers melt and there is a rise in the sea levels. The region also grapples with natural hazards such as floods, cyclones, and environmental shocks and stressors having severe human and economic consequences. Bangladesh is one of the countries, not only in the Pacific region, but also in the world that is most vulnerable to these adverse impacts of climate change. The country's exposure to climate risks impacts people's lives, livelihoods, health, food, water, ecosystems, and security. Other threats of Bangladesh's ecosystem include overexploitation of natural resources, land use changes, mismanagement of water resources, widespread pollution, and unplanned urbanization. USAID is supporting Bangladesh in addressing these threats and impacts of climate change through ecosystems conservation, including biodiversity conservation and developing resilient livelihoods, and among others. For more than a decade, USAID has helped Bangladesh protect its natural resources and biodiversity by bringing together local communities and government to form committees that co-manages more than 1 million hectares of wetlands and forest areas. In 2021, in partnership with the government of Bangladesh, civil society and local communities, USAID improved the management of over 66,000 hectares of forests, watersheds, and coastal areas, and supported more than 53,000 people with livelihood improvements. USAID partners with Interpol and US Department of Justice and work together to build local capacity to combat wildlife crimes in Bangladesh through improved regional coordination and building upon the analytical and prosecutorial capacity of the judiciary. In 2021, Interpol organized 3 training sessions on the smuggling of exotic species, which also highlighted the wildlife trafficking routes, links to firearm and cattle smuggling through land borders. We will continue to support Bangladesh's building its capacity and addressing these transborder wildlife crimes. As part of Indo-Pacific vision, another priority area for USAID is to support Bangladesh in advancing clean energy transition as well as utilization to accelerate Bangladesh's energy security and economic sustainability. In 2021, USAID focused its efforts in designing and procuring several new clean energy programs, including the mission's flagship clean energy project, Bangladesh Advancing Development and Growth Through Energy. These efforts support Indo-Pacific vision, specifically enhancing development and growth through energy initiative of Asia. USAID's agriculture and food security activities improved resilience by building the adaptive capacity of people and systems. Notably, systematic resilience is improved by assisting local institutions that research and develop stress-tolerant, high-yielding varieties of crops through biotechnology. USAID partners with government of Bangladesh and private sector institutions to strengthen the markets and agriculture value chain. It promotes improved agriculture management practices, including climate-smart technologies, to ensure better crop yields for farmers. We will continue to work with government of Bangladesh and private sector entities to support countries' development goals and help build the capacity and leverage the emerging opportunities in region for socioeconomic prosperity. If I may make a few comments about the papers that were presented, starting with the first paper from Wazidul Islam, I do really appreciate the fact that you highlighted the need for mitigation and protection, and that reminded me of my grad school a bit also. And good luck with your studies. And Dr. Imdadul Islam, you definitely presented multi-sectoral data, extensive multi-sectoral data that we could utilize to kind of analyze, and which you did. And what I appreciated most that you mentioned about MPAs, marine protected areas near St. Martin's. And I would be happy to say that our fisheries program was actually contributing to the establishment of the marine protected area for that. And definitely, Subaita, am I pronouncing it right? I do actually appreciate how your presentation integrated not only focusing on ecological security, but also integrated the human dimension to it. We do actually when we consider designing our programs a lot, we do consider the human dimension, including the gender aspect of it as well, because climate crisis do affect, there is a gender parity needs to be brought in on climate crisis issues. So with that, I just want to give you my back. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. Let's give him a hand. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Nazia Mins Habib. Nazia, I see you're online with us. Would you like to share your comments?
Yes, thank you very, very much, everyone, and distinguished guests, and the panelists, and the paper presenters. And thank you very much for Ambassador Tariq Karim, because when I spoke with him, he convinced me that I needed to come and share my thoughts, despite being on a holiday. So I'm actually here with this short family holiday with my 2-year-old. And it's quite fascinating to talk about a 2-year-old's life in a climate crisis situation, because I can already see how her life is captured by the pollution where we live in London. And it's quite important to know that these papers that are presented, each of them has picked up the climate crisis aspect for the region. And this is by no means a small topic to say that these topics are only about creating a diplomatic and a community-based approach, but it is far greater problem. And each of these papers, I would say, have done a very, very good job in terms of focusing and picking out some of the key variables, which often are not studied well enough. So Mozahidul Islam's paper, what I really found interesting is the mangrove forest bed that he picked out. That I often find as one of the most efficient and I would say relatively easier way of making climate vulnerability managed by replanting mangrove. But there's very limited efforts are currently in place in doing so. So this paper could take itself to the next level and actually focus on how it can be implemented in a more practical case. Dr. Marufa Akhtar paper, I do appreciate the differential vulnerability piece very, very much, because this is also something that my center at University of Cambridge, we work on quite closely, is that how you really engage with policymakers when it is not about macroeconomic decision making, but also focusing into the microeconomic vulnerabilities. And when it's differential, it's even more harder to grapple with. So paper comes short in, of course, by nature as a short paper, does not grapple into that, but we invest a lot of time and energy at Cambridge creating deliberative space by applying system design theories and practices with policy system so that we can bring decision makers along with the vulnerable communities together and come to a point of making a decision that will have a place within the policy debate. The work that we do here is totally into where Dr. Akhtar's work has finished, and I do think there is a little bit more to be done in that space if she wants to make it a very interesting paper and publish it. The next one is Amdadul Islam's paper. And for his paper, I know a bit of his work from the past, but the way he has gone about using the building back better principle with our ambition of the country and use the mixed method model to illustrate the resilience of multi-modular aspect, I thought that was very interesting. And I do think there is, in this paper, there is the nuggets of wisdom that we can bring it out into the policy making space and actually simplify some of the policy deliberation process we often take. That can take a really long time. But if you have a model that has already contemplated some of the critical variables and the system-based approach, you can use that to kind of spin out more realistic approach and not do the background material and data collection again. One thing I find as an educator and a researcher in policy system is that we spend a way more time actually regurgitating old data for the sake of creating an argument. And here, as an academic, I myself fail this agenda big time when we are advising governments. How many more times do I need to tell that another degree change in the climate are going to inundate 37 countries. Most of them are developing countries. If that data is not good enough, I think by writing 50 more papers with that same information is not going to change any of the differential vulnerability aspect that Dr. Akhtar's paper spoke out. It's not going to change any more of our policy of saving those protected animals and species, or replanting the mangroves, which are relatively cheap and easy. So a lot more focus and evidence needs to be collected what can be done. What's the art of possible, not what was done in the past. And I think each of these papers had come short in going into the future. So I will actually invite each of these authors to take another stab at their paper and think what is the art of the future. Because the art of the future is about diplomacy, it's about strategy, it's about curbing down cost of renovation. The reason I say the word renovation is that the structure is there. There are more than enough data, more than enough evidence, more than enough commitment from every stakeholder that you have heard today to do something good for the people of Bangladesh, to do the people of this Indo-Pacific. But there are not enough methodologies or strategic, deliberative space, a space where people from different sects can come together and imagine the possible. And that's the space of academia needs to move to, so that we can actually move into the future where my 2-year-old probably will have a future with less asthma attacks, because despite living in one of the finest countries, we still haven't avoided the impact of climate change. And I can only imagine what is it like in Bangladesh, being a Bangladeshi, born and raised there, living abroad. So with that, I will conclude my discussion on the papers itself. One last point I want to say with response, I'm very lucky that Dr. Razvi actually came before we got a chance to finish, is that with the University of Cambridge, I actually started a process with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to set up a Bangabandhu Research Center.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, COVID came and the project did not move ahead. It is definitely an agenda that government needs to consider, that how you use diaspora academics. I mean, Dr. Imdadul himself is one of my stars who is chairing this session today. How he has created the scholarship here, and he has now is making an amazing impact in Bangladesh. There are a lot of us here, we don't have a center, we are not unified in a systematic way, and the government needs to take a systematic approach to create orientation of us to collect information and evidence of the future. So as I said, the art of possible can become more of a reality. So I'm here at Cambridge. Anytime, please do get in touch. I run a center here at Cambridge. I have a lot more freedom and flexibility to what we can do with academic as academics. So I look forward to future engagement with this center at IUB. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Nazia, for some excellent directions into how to conduct future research, moving into what I call the solution space, and not spending all our time describing the problem ad infinitum. It's now my pleasure to invite our fourth and final discussant, Dr. K. Ayaz Rabbani, who is the head of the Department of Environmental Science and Management here at IUB. Dr. Rabbani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished guests, it is an absolute honor to be part of this very distinguished panel sitting between experts, world-renowned and international experts. My name is Dr. Rabbani. I'm the head of the Department of Environmental Science and Management here at Independent University of Bangladesh. I'll keep my comments very brief because I'm the last speaker in this panel, which I'm sure all of you do not have the patience to hear hours and hours of me speaking. I just wanted to focus on three things. One, I'll put my researcher hat on a little bit and comment on the three presenters. They all presented excellent work. Mujahid, my colleague Dr. Imadul, and Subaita, you all presented very interesting work of looking at climate change in different perspectives and looking at the data that has been generated. And I'm much more of a quantitative guy, a person who's comfortable more with numbers. And I always struggle when I look at social science research, but I understand very well that if you want to solve something as complicated as climate change, then you need to have the research focused on all aspects of this, both the quantitative or qualitative or hard or soft science. I hate that term, but that's what it is. And I was encouraged to see that all the researchers took that into account. They looked at data, they tried to give suggestions and recommendations based on the data that they saw, and gave a real social dimension to it. All of them talked about adaptive capacity and increasing social capital and things of that nature. As an educator, I put my educator hats on, and I spend most of the day working with young kids and trying to open their eyes to the realities of the world. I realized that climate change is a very unique problem. This is a problem no one has ever faced in the history of humankind. Climate change is an existential crisis. No one has faced this problem. And to come up with solutions, you have to think outside the box. You have to get, it is a challenge which has to give, which students will have to have skills that none of us has ever had before. As I said, I'm a numbers guy. But as a numbers guy, I can't stay in my numbers field and stay there forever. I will have to understand the social dimensions of things and expand my research into that area. And that's something that the students will have to have training from the very beginning. They cannot be in their little silos. They cannot be their geographers or environmental scientists or chemists or whatever they are. They have to look at a holistic way of solving this problem. And I was very heartened to hear Gauhar Rizvi sir talking about the need for more research in this area, in Bay of Bengal, and climate change and adaptation in general. And I echo Professor Salimul Huq's comment that the research should be more action research, more targeted research on what we can do, rather than rehashing what we already know. We know a lot. It's time to move on to what we can do, what works, what doesn't work. Let's talk about that and focus on the things that do work. As a citizen of this country, that's my third hat I'm putting on. As a citizen of this country, I realize that Bangladesh is at the center. At the opening ceremony today, Ambassador Tariq Karim talked about Bangladesh being at the epicenter of the Bay of Bengal and being at the epicenter of all the oceans that are all around the world. As a citizen of Bangladesh, we have to realize that we are at the center of this climate crisis, and we are very, very vulnerable. And the solution has to come from us. We can't be waiting for others. And it gives me immense pleasure that we have the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies here, who's taken up the baton of being the champion of regional cooperation centered in the Bay of Bengal to solve some of the pressing problems that we have, which includes climate change and ecological pollution and plastic pollution that Ambassador Karim talked about in the morning as well. I promise that I'll be very short and very quick, and I hope I'm keeping my promise. Thank you very much to all of you who came to listen to the panelists, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbani. Let's give him a hand. Is this on? On it. Good evening, everybody. I know we are well over our allotted time, but I'm going to beg your indulgence for a few more minutes to share some final thoughts. But before I do that, I'd like you to give a warm hand to the presenters of both the discussants and the papers. Very, very interesting set of presentations and discussions. So I'm going to share a few comments, not so much sum up what we've been talking about, but share some thoughts on the overall issues we've been talking about for the entire day today. And I'll do them in three sets. Firstly, at the global level, secondly, at the Indo-Pacific level, and then thirdly, at the Bangladesh level, but with a Bangladesh-US collaboration angle to that. At the global level, as Professor Rabbani just said, climate change is a huge global problem, the likes of which we have never seen before. And one of the important aspects of dealing with a problem of that scale is that we are not mentally prepared for problems of that scale. We are mentally prepared for national interests, and we have global meetings where we go and defend national interests, where national interests don't matter at all. It's global interests that have to be taken into account. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that mindset change. In the security arena, that's very, very true. So I'll just give you one example. And I'm sure everybody is very well aware of this, that the armed forces, the defense forces of the United States of America are by far the biggest, most expensive armed forces in the whole world. They are also the biggest emitter of more than 100 countries of emissions of greenhouse gases. Okay, so they are as much a part of the problem, and they are not prepared to be part of the solution. The guns are not going to stop climate change. Aircraft carriers are not going to stop climate change. They are not prepared, like they weren't prepared for the pandemic. They are not prepared for climate change. So the whole military posture that we have developed over centuries, and the nation-state defense mechanisms paradigms that we use are not fit for purpose in dealing with the security threat that climate change presents to us, and we need to rethink that. There's a lot of recognition now that climate change is a security threat multiplier, and we need to think about it. It is beginning to be recognized, but the change needed is not happening, and that's something that I think at a global level we need to recognize and do better at. In the Indo-Pacific region, we heard in several of the papers some very interesting facts and figures, which is that the coastal populations in this region are by far the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. If you all the way from the Pacific region to the African coast and the South Asian coasts in between, huge numbers of populations living in the low-lying coastal areas, and we had some very good examples of Bangladesh in particular, of the vulnerability of those coastal populations. And so that is, in my view, a very useful, overarching paradigm that we can apply for regional cooperation. We're all vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and none of us are ready for it, and none of us are well prepared for it. And so there is a win-win opportunity for regional cooperation across the geographies of the Pacific and the Indian Oceans for us to come together, at least at the scientific level, at the evidence-gathering level, at the research level, and then hopefully also percolating that evidence into decision makers and political leaders as well. And finally, let me just mention the case of Bangladesh, and I'll pick up on where Dr. Gohar Razvi made mention of the need, the gap of American academics understanding Bangladesh and Bangladeshi academics understanding the US. So one of the things that my center has already embarked on, we do, just to put the context, we do a lot of work on what we call loss and damage from climate change, which is sort of the third era, beyond mitigation and beyond adaptation. Now that climate change is happening, we have to deal with the losses and damages associated with it. And this loss and damage is happening everywhere in the world, not just in poor countries like ours, but also in rich countries like the US and Europe, etc. So we have started a program of studying loss and damage globally, and in particular, we have started a program of studying loss and damage in the United States of America, because they're not studying it. We are, and that's something that we can help them with. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Who's taking over? What?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. This is our closing session, Thematic Session 2. We are very close to finish our session today. We are far behind 15 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our concluding sessions. The theme is wrapping up US-Bangladesh partnership in the Indo-Pacific. We have several guests. So our chief guest already gave her his speech. His Excellency Professor Dr. Gohar Razvi, International Affairs Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister. So may I request Ambassador Retired Mr. Tarek Koim, sir, for being all guests in our strays. So we have His Excellency Mr. Saber Hussain Chaudhary MP, Honorable Chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Bangladesh. Thank you, sir. May I request Ms. Mashfi Shams, our Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of the Bangladesh. May I request Dr. Lailifor Yasmin, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. And our last guest, Professor Mr. Shahab Inam Khan. He is the Professor, Department of International Relations, Jahangirnagar University. He will join virtually from Colombo. So I also request our Ms. Charlina Hussein Morgan, the Cultural Attaché, US Embassy, Dhaka. Please come to the stage and have your seat, please. So, International Conference on Moving Forward in the Indo-Pacific Bangladesh role in fostering an open, resilient, and interconnected Bay of Bengal and beyond. This conference is the fourth session now, so we are very close to finish our session. Now, I would like to request, humbly request our ambassador, retired Mr. Tariq Karim, to moderate these concluding sessions. Sir, the is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Imadul Islam. And I'm pleased to welcome all of you back again. Thank you. I see quite a lot of people still staying on. Thank you. Welcome back, Rear Admiral Khurshid Alam. A warm welcome to our guest of honor, and by default you are not the chief guest, because the chief guest who was supposed to be here is already had to come in, and then he had to leave because of, he had an emergency to attend to. I'm pleased to welcome all the distinguished panelists, particularly my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Mashfi bin Shams. I thank her. She's just arrived back from Colombo after a rigorous few days, and it's very kind of you to come and grace us and be here. And Ambassador Farooq Subhan will join us online because he got stuck, and so he didn't want to take the risk of traffic. So if he is
I'm here.
Hello. Hi, Farooq. Welcome.
Sorry.
Welcome. Ms. Lalofur Yasmin from Professor, Department of International Relations. Mr. Shahab Inam Khan, who's still in Colombo, and I see he has joined us. Welcome, Shahab. So this is the closing and wrapping up session. We have had a full day's deliberation and discussion on this subject, and now we come finally pulling everything together on US-Bangladesh partnership and how we can go forward in the Indo-Pacific, and specifically where that partnership fits into what role Bangladesh plays in moving the lot of commonalities that have emerged. In fact, if you look at it, if you ignore all the public hype and the debate in the media, there's more that actually unites us than what divides us. And just as between two human beings, they cannot be clones of each other. They do not look at everything in the same way, even though they belong to the same species. Countries are like that too. They have their own personality, they have their own national interest, they have their own identity, they look at things from their point of view. You look at the same thing, but each country will have its own vision. And I think each has to respect the other, just as you expect one human being to respect another. Each country, whether we are small or big, medium or inconsequential, we have to respect each other. And I think our deliberations bring that out, that the commonality that is there in our approach to the problems that we face, as well as to the vast possibilities that exist, are what bring us together. And we need to focus on those things where we have this same shared approach to everything. I'll begin, since Dr. Gauhar Rizvi has already addressed us, and as I mentioned, he had to leave earlier, so for those of you who have just joined and didn't know about it, he did come in earlier. He had to rush off to some other engagement, so he did share his thoughts. I'll start with Ambassador Farooq Subhan, the former Foreign Secretary. who's had a very distinguished career in diplomacy and with whom I've had the privilege of serving in several places. And Ambassador Subhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Let me begin by congratulating you, your center, and IUB, as well as the U.S. Embassy for making this event possible. I have been able to follow a number of sessions, and I was very impressed by the expertise and the galaxy of experts, particularly this last session, I thought, focusing on the environment and the impact of climate change on Bangladesh, on the Indo-Pacific, and perhaps identifying some important areas of cooperation, I thought was very enlightening. I did listen to the chief guest's speech, and I would like to perhaps continue where he left off. I would say that looking over the last 50 years of our relations with the United States, we've covered a lot of ground. There have been a number of areas where we have worked closely together. And I certainly believe that there is ample room for cooperation between the United States and Bangladesh when it comes to the Bay of Bengal. Now, if we take the Indo-Pacific strategy as a kind of platform for cooperation between Bangladesh and the US and the other littoral states, but perhaps focusing more specifically on areas of cooperation between the US and Bangladesh, we can certainly identify a number of areas where we can work together. And I think the last session indeed identified climate change, global warming, and the environment as perhaps the centerpiece of this cooperation and the potential it offers. The US has, of course, a great deal of expertise on the subject, and bringing that to bear within our region, and specifically on issues and problems relating to cooperation in the Bay of Bengal would be, I think, of great importance and benefit to Bangladesh. But I should also add that in several other areas, we would certainly look to the US and work closely together. Of course, I should mention at the outset that Bangladesh's understanding of collaboration within the framework of the Indo-Pacific strategy focuses much more on the socio-economic aspects of the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was highlighted in the Indo-Pacific strategy document that was launched in February from the White House, which I reread for the third time yesterday. One sense one gets rereading this document that this is work in progress. It's also work in progress insofar as the countries in the region are concerned. Obviously, one important task ahead of us, I believe, is how do we bring into play the work that has already been done under various other initiatives. There have been several references to Boomstech and the fact that we have just concluded the Boomstech Summit. Clearly, Boomstech and its emphasis on connectivity is one important, if you like, institution or organization which would clearly work within the orbit or ambit of the Indo-Pacific strategy. We also have the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Bangladesh is the current chair, and obviously this has a slightly, if you like, larger reach than BIMSTEC, but that too very much fits into what we are trying to do both within the framework of the Indo-Pacific strategy and specifically the Bay of Bengal. There are several other initiatives at play. Bangladesh, like other countries in South Asia, believes that ASEAN has a major role to play, both as individual member states, but collectively. And we in South Asia, certainly in the case of Bangladesh, as a member of the ASEAN Regional Forum, we look forward to ASEAN being a major player, both in the Indo-Pacific strategy, but specifically in the context of the Bay of Bengal. And I believe these are all areas of convergence and synergy when it comes to our own thinking and outlook and perspective, as is the case with the United States. Let me also address four other very specific areas. We have in Bangladesh, and there have been earlier references to this in today's event, the blue economy and working on various aspects of the blue economy. Energy cooperation, oil and gas, here too. These are all areas where I believe we have an opportunity to work very closely with the United States, as indeed we have done so in the past. I think on strengthening the security in the area, insofar as strengthening the Bangladesh Coast Guards are concerned, collaboration on disaster management, and here I would like to recall the valuable assistance that Bangladesh has received in previous years, where in collaboration with the United States and its armed forces, we have worked extremely well in strengthening our capacity at disaster management and in addressing specific disasters. Also, I have the disaster of 1991, among others, in mind when I mention the cooperation that has already taken place. I should conclude by saying that this is a work in progress. We do note that other major players in the context of the Indo-Pacific strategy have their own, if you like, specific priorities. And so one important requirement, in my view, is the need for more dialogue. Particularly, I would say one of the major, let's say, developments in our bilateral relations with the United States is the fact that we have now opened multiple platforms for dialogues. They have, during the last 12 and a half years since the present government has been in power, I think there have been as many as 15 bilateral dialogues on a variety of subjects between the US and Bangladesh. And indeed, we will see further dialogues. I think one dialogue in particular, which covers a wide range of issues, was the Economic Partnership Dialogue, which was initiated at the end of September in 2020. And my understanding is that the next second Economic Partnership Dialogue will take place in Washington early in June. And I would believe that cooperation in the Bay of Bengal and getting a better understanding of where and how best we might collaborate in the case of the Indo-Pacific strategy could figure in this dialogue, as I'm sure will be the case when our foreign minister meets with his counterpart, Mr. Blinken, on the 4th of April on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the recognition of Bangladesh by the United States and the establishment of diplomatic relations. So I would like to conclude by saying this is work in progress. We welcome this initiative, and we hope that we can look forward to more dialogues in the future, bearing in mind the areas of convergence. But I should also stress that we do have challenges. Some of the figures that were mentioned in the area of climate change and global warming and how it would impact on a country like Bangladesh suggests a certain urgency in terms of deliverables coming out of these dialogues. So I would conclude by stressing the importance of converting the dialogues into actual programs and implementing those programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Farooq Subhan, for those words. You have highlighted not only where we have been working together, you have pointed out to the various sectors in which US is involved in with Bangladesh in our development pathway, and the necessity of our continuing to work together and build upon what we have already achieved so far. I think that is the main thing. How do we convert all these different things? There will always be challenges, but I think that is what sets Homo sapiens as a species apart from the rest, that they have the ability to rationally look at challenges and overcome them. So it's not just, we don't just react to gut instinct, knee-jerk reactions. We think it out and see how do we overcome this problem without exacerbating it. And I think we are well set on that part. We have a comfortable relationship with each other. We are confident of our relationship with each other. So I think that's the place where we start going forward from where we have come in 50 years. I now have great pleasure in inviting Ambassador Mashfi Shams, Secretary East, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have been old colleagues and friends, and we have been together in Delhi. We've served together when she was the Director General for South Asia, and I was High Commissioner in New Delhi, and then she was Ambassador, and a very successful one, in Kathmandu before coming back here and assuming her present position. Ambassador Shams, and you've just come back from from Colombo. we would love to hear from you your impressions of what Boomstech achieved and where it fell short. Over to you. You can use the mic there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tariq sir, for your kind words. You always give me a very glowing introduction. I don't know how much I deserve it. Thank you so much, sir. Distinguished panelists, my very senior colleagues are here. Honorable MP Sabir Hossain Chaudhry sir is here. So it's rather intimidating to be talking with such distinguished people in the same panel. So I had the good opportunity to listen to half of the last session on climate change, and I was very impressed with the amount of seriousness and the research with which everybody has been talking about and addressing today's conference and seminar. As Ambassador Tariq sir mentioned, I have just got off the plane from Colombo and from the Boomstech Summit. This is the 5th Boomstech Summit. It was held in Colombo, and I'd just like to share some of my thoughts on it because I know Tariq sir has a deep interest in this organization because he played a major role in bringing the secretariat of this organization to Dhaka when he was our High Commissioner in Delhi. Boomstech is going to celebrate its Silver Jubilee this year, and it's quite interesting that on the Silver Jubilee, this summit adopted the Boomstick Charter. So it took 25 years for the countries to get together and adopt a charter, which will give a legal sort of framework to all its activities. To my mind, Boomstech, and I also have a personal interest in it because I was working in Boomstech when this organization was first conceived and it took a shape. The Boomstech was in the declaration. The Boomstech declaration was in December '97, and I landed in Bangkok in 1998. So at that time, the ambassadors of Boomstech countries formed a loose joint working group, and we shepherded the organization for a long time until the secretariat, in fact, took over in 2014. So to my mind, this is one institution, regional organization, which is yet to reach its full potential, and the member states are yet to understand how best we can use the potential of this organization. This grouping of countries which came together with a loosely identifying themselves as countries which have a footprint on the Bay of Bengal, have yet to really catch the imagination of people's minds, and yet to, there are a lot of sectors have been identified. There have been numerous meetings are going on, and we are doing a lot of work. But we are yet to catch people's imaginations and identify ourselves as a Boomstech country. One good thing is that this summit also adopted the Boomstech master plan for connectivity. So this has a large number of projects, mainly which will be funded by ADB. And this will enable the countries of the Boomstech region to connect with each other. And connectivity was stressed individually by all the member states and collectively by in the declaration also. So everybody has realized that the region must be connected. There must be better connectivity. And also everybody realized that the the Bay of Bengal, which unites or brings together these countries, also must be harnessed. So we are talking of coastal shipping, a Boomstech coastal shipping agreement. We are talking of harnessing the marine resources. We are talking of connecting the dots among the countries in this, with the identifying ourselves as, from stretching from this eastern side, stretching from this Thailand and then all the way an arc, all the way, maybe stretching it to Maldives, and seeing how best we can cooperate. Boomstech countries this time also have been talking of new aspirations because, we are all increasingly becoming developed. So we have been talking of aspirations. They have been talking of better, self-reliant because of the supply chain disruptions that are taking place because of the recent developments in Europe. So they are all talking of becoming more integrating the region better so that we can support each other for uninterrupted supply chains. And there is, I think, better increased, appreciation that there is much that we can do together. And of course, Bangladesh has always been at the forefront of Boomstech and regional connectivity. We have been pushing, BBIN, we have been pushing SARC, we are pushing Boomstech, and always we are putting ourselves right at the center because we are, as we always like to say, that connectivity is productivity. The Indo-Pacific, did not really feature so much in the conversation, but there was a realization that Boomstech needs to open up dialogue with the other regional organizations or groupings. So Iowa was mentioned as a potential partner or somebody with whom we can have more conversation with because of similarities of some of the areas of cooperation. We recently we have seen Australia's deep interest in having some sort of role or some sort of partnership with some in the Boomstech area. So the Boomstech countries are now also opening up to increased interaction with others. And I think in that perspective, there would be, I think in the future, we would be having more dialogue on the Indo-Pacific because, of course, everybody wants development. The countries of the Boomstech region desperately need to develop, and any sort of assistance and partnership is welcome. But at the same time, everybody was also talking of, being open and inclusive and stable and peaceful and sustainable. So I think that is another area where we would all like to focus. So I think I'll end here now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mashfi, for giving us a first-hand brief on what's happened there. I find I'm greatly encouraged by two things that you mentioned of what happened there. One, that the Boomstech countries have decided to approach the connectivity issue as a major area of focus and trying to operationalize that. You mentioned that perhaps, I was hoping you'd say that, and you did, that the coastal shipping agreements, which are now primarily bilateral between Bangladesh and India and Myanmar, and then India is talking with Thailand. Sri Lanka was interested, it hasn't yet joined. If that happens, then connectivity will be a going concern. And I think this is, I will share this publicly, but this is my personal opinion. It's not, I don't know whether the government will even think about it or go that way or others will. I think the problem with Boomstech is the way in it was formed and with the name itself. It's an initiative for multi-sectoral, technical, etc. Okay, because at that time, in the times in which it was formed, that was the perception and the vision, and there were various elements, major and minor, involved in it. But if you're talking of this as an institution, I think it is still to graduate to that. It is still an initiative. There's a big difference between an initiative and an institution empowered to actually take on things and drive and push things. Number two, if we're talking of this as an institution to embrace the whole Bay of Bengal, then the current configuration has to think in terms of Boomstech Plus. So I'm encouraged by the fact that it decided that, okay, we should think of opening up and inviting others. But first of all, I feel personally it should invite Malaysia and Indonesia to come in, and perhaps Singapore and Maldives as extensions of the Boomstech configuration on the east and the west. That would make sense. That would then lead into the larger configuration of IORA, which is like a constellation. And you know, the larger the constellation, the more difficult it is to find smaller groupings. With those personal thoughts, they are personal, so let it not be recorded that I'm reflecting any government opinions, but I hope somebody will pick it up and work on it. I invite now Professor Lailofer Yasmin, Professor, Department of International Relations, Dhaka University, to make her comments.
Thank you, Ambassador Tariq Karim, for inviting me in this very prestigious gathering. His Excellency, Mr. Sabir Hassan Chaudhary, MP, Ambassador Ms. Mashrafi Shams, previously Ambassador Farooq Sobansar has also spoken. We are going to talk about wrapping up on US-Bangladesh partnership in the Indo-Pacific. So I'll first talk about Indo-Pacific, Bay of Bengal, and then in between I'll be talking about Bangladesh-US relations. I believe I have about 10 minutes. So what I was telling Sharlina, that teaching gives us a different kind of sort of problem. After 12 years of teaching, we tend to forget names. So Sharlina helped me out with this one. And for diplomats, it's a different ball game altogether. You always have to remember names. We can always, take this opportunity to forget some of the issues and highlight some of the issues that someone may not like. And anyway, so first is that we often forget that the strategic importance of Bay of Bengal is not a new one. It has acquired, rather re-acquired its strategic importance in today's world because of a shift in focus of power from the west to the east. Let us look at colonialism in how the British came here. That was through the Kolkata port, and that was happened through this Bengal. So Bangladesh, not only today, but Bengal originally has always been the gatekeeper, the gateway to the subcontinent and gatekeeper of the Bay of Bengal region. We often tend to think that it is something new and something new that we are studying about, learning about. But this entire region, Indian Ocean's history of people migrating from one place to the other, this has been quite rich, and this was always documented rather later on, because we Bengalis are generally oral people. We are very bad at keeping records. We socially, we rather like to gossip, do adda in our social structure, then write it down. And I'm sure when I'll be asked to give my written comments, I will sort of start asking for extensions. So that is one issue that we need to remember, that strategic importance of the Bay of Bengal is not a new thing. It has always been there, but with the retreat of the British Empire from here and the onset of the Cold War, we saw that rather Atlantic and the Pacific, they acquired a different kind of strategic importance. Now let us look at America's two-ocean policy. It is Pacific, the Pacific and Indian Ocean. What is the two-ocean policy of China, Japan, all Pacific and Indian Ocean? And with Indian Ocean certainly connected, it's the Bay of Bengal, which is the largest bay in the world. And look at this, the makeup of the subcontinent. The demographic power is the location, home of three religions, buzzing, and the demographic factor, and how we are contributing to the world. For example, just one information, in terms of supplying online labor, India is top in the world. Bangladesh is following in a second position. So we have numerous ways this subcontinent is making, the countries of subcontinent are making a global imprint. So here, one other thing that I would like to point out, that often this strategic importance of Bangladesh is rather pointed out or reminded to us by external actors. We often tend to think of ourselves as a small country with less capabilities. We rather look at weaknesses, or instead of emphasizing on our strengths. In Bengali, there is a sort of saying, "Loke jake boro bole boro shei noy, boro shei hoy, nije jake boro bole boro shei noy." That is the humbleness of our approach, and that actually is doing more harm than portraying what are our strengths. So that is another area I would like to point out, that we Bangladeshis often try to be too humble than we need to be. We need to point out our strengths. And here we find out that there are so many ways that Bangladesh and America can work together. We need to find out our complementarities. We need to find out our mutual areas of interest and engagements, because there are a lot of areas which are still unexplored or underexplored. And here, not only that what would be the method of engagement. Here I would like to point out, whenever I spoke in Dhaka, I get one scenario. Whenever I go to Cox's Bazar or in the northern part of Bangladesh, I get another scenario. We are talking about connectivity, physical connectivity, but connectivity inside the country, that is another sort of area that we need to look into, that we often have urban-centric ideas, but we need to bring more people from coastal areas and other areas and to hear their views, that what are needed in those particular areas. So we do have a center-periphery disconnect that need to be addressed, and that is where and I've seen how American embassy works here. They go to different parts of the city to gauge popular perception about America, and that is how I think we can really sort of portray what Bangladesh is. Bangladesh is not all about Dhaka. It's not Dhaka-centric, but there is another Bangladesh outside of Dhaka. Just go 20 kilometers outside of Dhaka. It's a different Bangladesh altogether. So education can work as a vital tool of diplomacy. It's not only about Fulbright scholarship or the exchange programs, but this educational program should also involve, as previously spoken by His Excellency Dr. Gahor Rizvi, that often there is less information about Bangladesh in American media. We always see Hollywood showing Bangladesh. Extraction, for example, the mostly watched movie of last year, of 2020, I think. Yes, it showed now Bangladesh is the epicenter of crime in South Asia. We don't really want to watch Bangladesh from that perspective. And you look at all the sitcoms or all the other movies, and there Bangladesh is shown as a poor country where, so we need a new narrative. And this new narrative, I believe, must come from various levels. Number one, think tanks like Karim sir is doing here. Think tanks can provide informed understanding about Bangladesh, and there can be exchange programs not only between students, but think tank to think tank level. That is not only G2G, but also track 1.5 and track 2.0 sort of work can be done, where think tanks can promote Bangladesh to American audience. And not only that, we can also look at that how these narratives come from students who are sitting here. They can write about Bangladesh in global media, where I believe American embassy can help them to reach that particular sort of audience who would matter in American policy making. So it's a combination of, it's a multi-layer sort of strategy that we have to adopt from Bangladesh, how to promote a positive image. Yes, we have our weaknesses that we have to work on that, but at the same time, what are the strengths and how that can be promoted? We have a buzzing, young people. We have a demographic dividend which will last till 2032 or 2033, and this is the time that we can invest in our youth and promote them. We in previous sessions we talked about unskilled labor and our how we need to promote this area. Climate change is another area, and in these sort of discussions, instead of providing talk about solutions and providing suggestions coming from a very urban-centric perspective, we need to reach out to them and understand that. And another area would be the wider Indo-Pacific region and how the world has become so unstable as we are speaking. We know that there is a dire necessity of following a rules-based international order, and here Bangladesh would like to work in very closely with America and all the other countries as long as it becomes a very inclusive sort of policy. So Bangladesh, America is the largest source of FDI in Bangladesh, and for Bangladeshi students, America is still the most attractive place. But at the same time, what are the other areas that Bangladesh and America can work in promoting IPS, in promoting free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region? Because as stated over and over again, that in Bangladesh's foreign policy, we would like to maintain a distinct type of neutrality. Neutrality does not mean that we are not going to call out in the case of violation of international law, but neutrality means that we would like to pursue policy in our own fashion by keeping in mind of our national interests. So this is where, because this Bangladesh, as I often said in a number of occasions, because last year we celebrated Golden Jubilee of Bangladesh, that this is not a Bangladesh of 1971. As much as 1971 tells us where we want to go, 1971 also tells us how far we have come. So this Bangladesh in 2022 shows a bold Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is now at the agenda setting level when it comes to issues pertaining to our national interest. And that is why it was very heartening for us to hear that to identify Bangladesh as a middle power or middle emerging power. So therefore, we need to understand that what are the agenda setting capacities that Bangladesh can develop more, and what are the ways that Bangladesh can sort of take itself further, because this is just a 50-year-old young child. It's not yet a middle-aged country, and we have a lot to learn from international community, and there has to be a bilateral engagement, a regional engagement, for example, Boomstech, BBIN, and taking it further to IORA and other regional organizations, and at the global level, because let us not forget that Bangladesh is one of the top troops contributing country at UN peacekeeping operations. So we have also shown a keen interest in maintaining international peace and security. We have not shied away from taking this kind of responsibilities where other countries have not really sort of put their soldiers into action when it came to maintaining peace and security in the continent of Africa and in other areas at the heart of Europe when conflict in Bosnia-Herzegovina went on, and Bangladesh sent its troops, and with American assistance we have now topmost learning center BIPSHOT, which is working to develop both the knowledge-based understanding of UN peacekeeping operations as well as the practical area of it, because I believe the Shanti Doot that takes place in Bangladesh every 4 years, and last time I had the unique opportunity to work as a UN Civil Affairs officer, which was just a practice session, and different scenarios were played out. In the areas of WPS, Women, Peace and Security, how Bangladesh promoted the idea, long-standing demand of women's movement to bring women at the discussion table. And in 2000, the resolution 1325 recognized Bangladesh's effort, recognized the effort of women at peacemaking, peace building, at all stages of peace building. In the areas of countering violent extremism, another area that Bangladesh and America can work together. And this is why when His Excellency Dr. Rizvi spoke that American scholars should also come to Bangladesh and understand the nuances of Bangladeshi societies, and that will help them to sort of get away a lot of misperception about Bangladeshi societies. And also I would like to highlight that there are, in bilateral relations is often a topsy-turvy sort of journey. Often there are obstacles, and we need to learn how to work together despite areas where we might find that very little common interest is there. So altogether, I would like to sort of thank the Center for taking up this very interesting and very timely conversation on the Bay of Bengal, extending it to Indo-Pacific and extending it into global level where Bangladesh matters, because I believe in January in one of the seminars on Bangladesh's outlook on global changes, it was asked that why Bangladesh is talking about global issues. Now look at what is happening today. Whatever happens in any part of the world, it affects Bangladesh because we live in a world of complex interdependence. What is happening in any part of the world, that affects Bangladesh's interest, that affects Bangladesh's development as we are waiting to begin our journey to the next stage of development. So I believe I will stop here and I will sort of talk more about actions than what has happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lailufar, for your very spirited remarks and very well thought and enunciated. I'll pick on 3 points which struck me. Number one, you mentioned about why do we have to be so humble all the time. Okay, humility in itself is a virtue. I learned from my father that you judge a man's greatness by the degree of his humility. However, it doesn't mean that you belittle yourself, you become self-effacing, you withdraw from doing things you can do, you underestimate yourself, you undermine yourself. So that's I think, that perhaps has something to do with the epithet that was hurled at us, almost 5 decades ago. We have left that behind. We have, I think, by now, certainly our youth have, I think the youth that you're reaching out to and teaching, perhaps you'll find a certain degree of confidence, self-confidence. We must tell them to have self-confidence but not become arrogant. The number 2 point is, if we are at the epicenter of the oceanic planet that we are at, that's how I see ourselves, then be prepared that anything that happens at the other end of the oceanic planet will affect us. And we must know how to be prepared for it and how to react to it. And I think if we can inculcate these 2 things in our students, it's important for them to engage them in conversations like this and dialogues like this and make them think, because they are our future voting citizens, they are our future leaders, and it has to develop at that level. So thank you very much for your remarks. I now come to Professor Shahab Inam Khan, Professor in the Department of International Relations, Jahangirnagar University, now sitting enjoying the balmy weather in Colombo after having got over the Boomstech summit. Shahab, your thoughts?
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, I'm more into the Indo-Pacific conference that is happening in Colombo, hosted by the Defense University here and the US State Department. And this is exactly the platform where we have been talking about the Bay of Bengal to a great extent. And I think your events perfectly coincides with what we have discussed all through the day with the participation from the region. And we had multiple senior speakers from the State Department at the level of Undersecretary attending this particular program virtually. And I think there are multiple issues which I believe I should share in the context of Indo-Pacific. The first thing is there is a general agreement among the participating countries in this particular platform that we have to have a collaborative measure within the Bay of Bengal region, as you have rightly mentioned, sir, that if something happens in the other part of an ocean, will certainly have an implication on us. And this is something which has made all the countries to understand that collaboration and cooperation should be inclusive rather than exclusive. And in fact, the role of the China came in which there was a greater consensus that, of course, climate is one issue where we cannot have a successful Indo-Pacific without taking all these countries on board. And I think this is a very important message that has come up over here, as Mashviapa was quite clear about Boomstech, and Boomstech was another issue that was clearly highlighted in this particular program by saying that this is one of the unique institutions, although it is initiative, as you have said, sir, but one of the institution which actually talks about pollution, ranging from pollution to dead zone to the technologies. And everyone agreed that the Bay must be seen through not the security prism all the time, which is essentially a part of the new Indo-Pacific strategy, as Ambassador Sovan sir has mentioned. And under that, there are provisions and enough confidence building clauses that shows that the Bay should be seen more from an economic and governance point of view rather than the security and military point of view. And there was a greater understanding among the countries that, yes, while every country has their market as a clear priority, and security is too, but of course, climate change is heavily influenced by both market and security. But in that case, understanding how market and security will be unfolding in the coming years is something that we have to be thinking under the Indo-Pacific strategy to a great extent. And there is the question of energy cooperation. And this has, I'm quite sure, all over the day, energy cooperation was discussed in this particular program in Dhaka. Three major issues that the countries have essentially talked about. One is there is an increasing shift in consumption and how we better facilitate this consumption that will be environmentally ethical and environmentally sustainable. And that's exactly where, if you look at the number 5 points of the Indo-Pacific strategy, an articulation is there. That we have to really go for a lower carbon footprint. And in that case, the changes in the environmental energy consumption pattern and energy production pattern has to change, which means the Indo-Pacific must be one of the conduit for better energy cooperation through technological innovation, for lower carbon emission, and on the other hand, better transition towards the renewables. And I think this is one remarkable thing that everybody has agreed that the Indo-Pacific collaboration will allow to see that the Bay is better governed and has better technological and policy solutions. And there is, of course, the concerns regarding illegal fishing, which again, Boomstech is in much better position than SAARC to look into. And I think everybody agrees that rather than reinventing wheels by creating pocket institutions, strengthening and reforming Boomstech and SAARC, which together has the potential to create multi-trillion-dollar economy, has to be facilitated through technical cooperation. And technical cooperation doesn't necessarily has to come from the United States. Rather, there are options coming from the European Union, European states, and even the innovations that is taking place in the region. There is also a concern about the securitization of the water. And I think if you look at the strategy and perhaps the new visions that has been talked about by the Biden administration, which actually correlates our own vision in the Bangladesh, as we are also assuming some sort of leadership position in the climate change or climate mitigation regimes. So the importance of collective resources for creating climate resilient infrastructure, particularly in the coastal area. I mean, re-engineering of the infrastructure is something that has to be done. And in that case, very interestingly, the role of private sector was heavily highlighted. I mean, putting everything on the shoulder of the states, because every state has different national power and national capability, and of course, national economic priorities. The responsibility of the private sector has to be brought in. And that's exactly where the new discourse that has been floated today to really get how to get the private sector within the aegis of Indo-Pacific strategy. And there is, of course, the private sector has the capacity to really do research and development, and therefore to infuse those research and development in terms of climate-aligned infrastructure. And a climate-aligned infrastructure investment is pretty much is something that is very much there. The issue of information sharing is another critical factor, particularly on the pollution ground. Even if you look at the upper riparian and the lower riparian states, and that water leading to the bay is perhaps sometimes a subject of political shyness, but definitely it has been highlighted that this pollution data is one of the massive problem in creating sustainable strategy, which will go beyond our myopic idea of security. Henceforth, this de-securitization of the bay was also heavily highlighted, and which I believe is also related to a energy security, which often is linked with national security. But perhaps this is the first time the countries are also saying that energy security of one state will have detrimental effect on the other state, because one economy is dependent on the other economy, citing the classic example of Bangladesh and India, in which Bangladesh's economy is very important for India, as well as Indian economy is certainly very important for Bangladesh and beyond. So in that case, how best we can manage the resources that are available in the Bay of Bengal through the alliances that we are talking about within the Indo-Pacific was heavily highlighted. And I think the national capacities and asymmetries are very important to understand, in which policy harmonization was highlighted. And perhaps that is something we need to have a greater discussion, and perhaps this discourse has to be floated through your institutions and other institutions in collaboration. And very important issue, which we often forget to mention when we bring the security dimension in the case of not only Bay of Bengal, but overall in the Pacific, Atlantic, and beyond, is the nuclearization and the movement of nuclear-powered vehicles. I mean, submarines, ships, and the accidents that is possible to happen. And this is one concern that everybody has agreed that, yes, if there is an accident, this will have geopolitical catastrophe, at least in a polite way. The very simple reason is then the polarization stuff will come up, and who to be blamed and how to be cleaned. And in that case, the arms race was very much a concern, which was, I think, is essential to in our discussion. The major challenge, of course, was bilateralism. And this is one thing we need to really think when we think about in the Pacific. I mean, particularly my talk was much more on a line that we have bilateralism quite prominent in South Asia. And hence, the unfortunate result is we are the least economically cooperating or integrated region in the whole world. And in that case, that shows that we have a greater interest in bilateralism, and which often leads to ad hocism. And at least if we have some sort of understanding how Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific vision will be articulated and executed will perhaps give us a greater leverage, particularly the medium and the smaller countries, to come together and have an alliance, not only on the case of climate, but also on the place of Bay and defense. And this is why I think this particular event, sir, your event is very much important, in which the vulnerability, I'm quite sure every speaker has talked about, scientific approaches as well as socio-political and livelihood approaches are there. But the problem lies is the new technologies, how these are being implemented through the ships, unmanned vehicles, will perhaps determine the future of the resource extraction. And resource extraction can sometimes lead to greed. And I borrow it from Tariq Karim sir a few days back. He was talking about how greed can actually disrupt the ecosystem. And that ecosystem will, if the ecosystem doesn't function, we have a better future for the next generations to come. And henceforth, there is a greater understanding that the commerce, as well as the transportation, which is a sea line of communication, often interpreted as strategic line of communication, is one concern. But again, if it is de-securitized and perhaps the market remains as the core focus of Indo-Pacific, and the ethical governance of the Bay will probably give us much better impetus to govern the region than what we have been doing over the past years. So with that note, sir, I think we have a greater opportunity right now, while the neutrality factor continues to dominate the geopolitics and geostrategy. But at the moment, what we are seeing that in the Pacific can be seen beyond the narratives of neutrality or partiality, rather, because this essentially talks about governance and the rules-based approach to the waters. And with that note, sir, I thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk. And I believe that in the Pacific strategy, that the main core purpose of this discussion and linking it with the Bay of Bengal in a changing geostrategic and geopolitical situation, rather what I believe as the blurring space between geoeconomics and geostrategy, gives us an opportunity to rethink our approaches to the waters as well as the ocean. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. You deserve really a big round of applause. You have done what, in a sense, I was feeling the lack of, because this conference was supposed to be the second part of a two-series conference, one building on the conference in Colombo. And I lamented the fact that there wasn't enough, there was too much overlap time, so we couldn't follow that. Shahab has done an admirable job in doing actually the US Embassy's job in giving you a complete rundown on what's happened and a note on his take. I am heartened by the fact that that conference arrived at 2 or 3 important consensus points. One, that we need to move towards a state of interdependence. 2, that energy security is one of the areas in which we can create that. And then the Bay of Bengal, of course, offers that opportunity. I would only caution that when we go aggressively into that, we keep the integrity of the ecology in mind. This is one of the points which was made by our additional secretary who came and some of the other speakers, that whatever development project we take, we do need development to lift up our people from poverty and take them to the next higher stage, but we have to make sure that in the process we do not undermine the future by somehow doing a damage to the ecological integrity which holds this very fragile climatic system of the planet together. And Number 3, he mentioned about he lamented the fact that, everybody lamented that there's been too much securitization of the issue. Perhaps in a sense it has, because everybody has been focusing on military securitization. I am more concerned about the securitization that could come if the Bay of Bengal's integrity as a commons is undermined ecologically and environmentally. Because this Bay region, with our countries from Sri Lanka to Indonesia and adjacent countries, is home to a quarter of the world's population. And it's densely packed in a small space. And if people lose because of what happens, or if the dependence of the Bay of Bengal is undermined by the Bay itself becoming endangered, then it will create spin-offs which will lead to non-traditional security, which will then play into traditional security. And that is something we have to be always very, very upfront, in dealing with and keeping that in consideration. Now, we have run over time, but, and I have to really admire and thank my friend, His Excellency Saber Hussain Chaudhry, MP, Honorable Chair of the Standing Committee of Parliament on the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, a very, very important ministry for Bangladesh. And that ministry actually should be coordinating hand in hand with the Planning Commission every development activity that takes place. Because some department will do something which will actually not take into consideration what is happening to some other places elsewhere. Sir, your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. And it's been a long day, but I think very productive also in terms of how we see the global challenges that faces a country like Bangladesh. Let me at the beginning thank the organizers, the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies under the IUB, and of course the American Embassy for jointly organizing this. And I'm sure this is going to be the first of many similar interactions and discussions and dialogue, because I think what we are perhaps trying to do in this first event is to try and at least ask the right questions, and then maybe as we go down the line, we can have a deeper discussion on the individual components. What I did this morning was I came in and attended the inaugural session, and I'm so glad I did that, because just coming in for the concluding session and talking about various perspectives without having a context is actually disrespectful to the actual event, and also it undermines the objective of having such a conversation. So I think it's important that we have an overall view. And as I came in and I listened, and in particular to what His Excellencies were talking about, of course, our Foreign Minister gave an overall view of how Bangladesh looks at it. Listened very intently to the newly appointed US Ambassador. And of course, the European perspective was also there. And as I listened to those thoughts, and this is where I would like to acknowledge the contribution of Ambassador Tariq Karim. There's a proverb I'm sure you're all very familiar, or at least a saying, which is that why did Allah create us with 2 ears and 1 mouth? Basically, we should be speaking less and we should be listening more. And I think that became very apparent when I was here for the first session. So we should actually listen twice as much as we speak. And of course, Ambassador Karim continues to enlighten us, enrich us with his perspectives, with his wisdom, with his understanding of the issues. And I hope he will continue to do that. In fact, I think he will be of even greater service than what he was as an ambassador when he's trying to promote these issues, which are perhaps more important than ever for the context of Bangladesh. So thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And a warm round of applause, please, for him. I think he's done a great job. As this is a concluding session, the first thing I want to share with you, and I was just writing down some notes on my iPhone. What is the biggest takeaway? You've heard so many thoughts, so many ideas. So when you go back home and later on before going to sleep, hopefully, you try and reflect on what have you heard? What is the most important thing that you want to remember about this conversation? And I think it came out in the various discussions. And that is the fact that there are many regions in the world and they're all important. But what happens in particular in Indo-Pacific, what happens in particular in this region is going to shape the trajectory of the world in the 21st century. I think that's the one single biggest takeaway. Of course, it has huge implications because when you juxtapose that with what Ambassador Tariq Karim talked about this morning, about Bangladesh being in the epicenter of the oceanic world, if I may put it that way, it imposes a heavy burden on us in terms of stewardship, in terms of leadership, in terms of setting the agenda, and in terms of moving forward as a world. So I think this is an incredibly important topic. And just for members of the young generation who are here, I was just jotting down some points. What is this region? The fastest growing region in the world, fastest growing. So remember that, because the future that we talk about is not going to be mine, or I certainly hope it will be Ambassador Tariq Karim's, but I won't be around for that. But it's your future. So this is a question of, this is a region which is the fastest growing region of the world. I looked up. It accounts for 60% of the global economy. So think of the whole world. 60% of the economy is generated within this region. 2/3 of all economic growth over the last 5 years have taken place in this region. It is home to more than half of the world's population. More than half of the world's population. And 7 of the biggest economies, 7 of the 15 biggest economies are in this region. We all know that Bangladesh is on track to become a top 30 global economy. It's a matter of a few years only. So we will also be joining this league. So it's no wonder that what happens in Indo-Pacific is going to shape the trajectory of the world. So remember that. So that's really the context for everything that we are doing. So I tried to listen very carefully to what the US ambassador was saying. And let me be brutally frank. When words such as Indo-Pacific come up, some people may feel that it is too sensitive an issue for them to engage in. If I say something and I'm going to offend the United States, am I going to offend China? Who am I going to please? These sort of thoughts come in because that is what unfortunately has shaped the public discourse. So when Ambassador Haas was talking about the basic principles, and I made sure that I put them down, I hope I've got them down correctly. The first thing he talked about is that the 5 principles. First is free and open. Freedom is, of course, something which is endemic to us. Both the US and the Bangladesh achieved independence and freedom through wars of independence. It's enshrined in our constitution. It's also enshrined in the constitution of the US. And from freedom, openness follows naturally. So the two are actually linked. So no issues there as far as the Bangladesh position is concerned. Next, we talked about connectivity, interconnectedness, looking at the world as a global village. And this is what our Prime Minister, Honorable Sheikh Hasina, said in the World Economic Forum 2019, and I think it's important for all of us to just refresh our memories, and I quote her, "In between Eastern and Northeast India, China on the west, and Southeast Asia merits attention of the global businesses as a seamless economic space. Seamless economic space. Beyond our own 162 million, Bangladesh can be the connective landmass to a combined market of 3 billion people." I think in that one statement, she has talked about the imperative of connectivity. This is how we grow. And our biggest asset is our geographical location. We can't change our neighbors because neighbors are there, the borders are there, we have drawn up those borders. So what are we doing to leverage this biggest asset that we have? So connectivity, no issues. Next, a safe and secure Indo-Pacific. That was the third point. Of course, when it comes to security, I think it's time for us to reimagine security. Starting a war or engaging in conflict should not be the default response to global disputes. That is simply not on. So when we talk about security in today's context, it's really human security. It's freedom from fear, from want, from indignity. So it's human security that we are talking about. And the two greatest existential challenges that we face, one is climate change, it's been talked about, and it's not something that may happen in the future. In the case of Bangladesh, it is happening now, right now, today, here and now. And the other is nuclear weapons. We spend $100 billion a year just to maintain the weapons. What use were those weapons when it comes to a global pandemic? What use are nuclear weapons when it comes to the impacts of climate change? So we have to reimagine what we mean by security. And I think the other concept which is now coming in, and I wanted to make a note of this, which is why I wrote it down, is that of common security. It's common security. And what does common security mean? It means that international security must rest on a commitment to joint survival rather than a threat of mutual destruction. So we have to reimagine security, we have to reimagine development, and this is where the future actually lies. I'm only as safe as a person who is in the country next door. If their future is not, or their security is not ensured, my security is not ensured. So how can we move the narrative to one of common security? Of course, safety is important, stability is important, and then you come to the whole idea of prosperity, which is also in the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think what we should be talking about, and maybe Ambassador Tariq Karim can take this up on a later occasion, I believe it was the Japanese Prime Minister, Mr. Abe, who talked about the arc of democracies in Asia. I think we have to talk about arcs of prosperity. We have to talk about arcs of resilience, which is another thing that has come in. So how do we shift the dialogue? How can Bangladesh, when we talk about I think you need to do away with that. And can we go back to we don't want to read about me. Where is the other, So moving forward in the Indo-Pacific. And because it's an event sponsored by the US, I was always, one of my familiar quotes or thoughts was from Bill Clinton. And when he was talking about how do we move forward with any agenda. And I think his response was not quoted perfectly, but the sense was, it is only when our vision of the future is more powerful and more compelling than our memories of the past do we move forward. So how do we create that overarching vision for a prosperous Indo-Pacific? I think that's how we move the needle. That's how we move the agenda. And if we are going to be stuck in what happened before, we are never going to move forward. So I think both the US and Bangladesh have a joint responsibility to promote multilateralism in a new light. I was in an event a few days ago where UNESCAP presented a report, and they were talking about how badly we were actually doing on the SDGs. We are not in target to achieve any of the SDGs. And if we continue business as usual, it's going to take, we won't be there in 2030, we will be there in 2065, 35 years later. So how can we promote a prosperous Indo-Pacific and at the same time ensure that no one is left behind, which is the aspiring slogan of the SDGs? How do we connect the two? We can't go on creating new agendas. You know, we have to be clever in doing this. We have to connect the dots. We see how the agendas and the themes in Indo-Pacific have traction when it comes to SDGs and other development goals that we have. And how can we then connect the dots and come up with a new agenda? It's all very well, and of course it's right that we celebrate 50 years of diplomatic relations between the US and Bangladesh. But it's not just talking about the past. It is also trying to say, what is the next 50 years going to look like? How are these two countries going to come together? What is the contribution to the global good and the global commons that we as two countries, sovereign states, can bring in? So when I listened to what the US ambassador had to say, there was almost complete agreement. And I say this not because I'm trying to detract from that, the only word which was not used by the US when it came to defining the Indo-Pacific was the word inclusive. Everything else was mentioned. But I think here, as we say, you know, what is the true test of friendship? It is to have disagreements and still continue to be friends. And I think the US-Bangladesh relationship is at that level. We can look at each other in the eye and we can say, we agree to disagree on this. And as we know, if you look at the entire Indo-Pacific, the oceans, the continents, everything coming together, over 3,000 languages, a multitude of faiths and beliefs. So diversity is what determines, what distinguishes the Indo-Pacific. So we cannot have a complete or an ideal definition of what the Indo-Pacific stands for. I think the concept is there, the broad principles are agreed upon, and then there might be differences when it comes to the edges. But I think the basic thrust is the same. And we in Bangladesh have to move from just making statements about the Indo-Pacific, and we must have coherence in terms of what that stands and how that integrates and how do we mainstream, how do we dovetail it into our overall planning. How do we leverage the benefits? How do we leverage the potential of the Indo-Pacific, which is so very apparent to everyone? So how do we do that? And what is the role that Bangladesh can play? So I think this is going to be a task for our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so we move beyond statements. We have a plan, we have a strategy. And then we have, it's going to be incremental steps. I don't think there'll be a revolutionary change overnight. But let us have those initial steps. Let us try and build faith or rebuild faith in multilateralism. Let Bangladesh and US show that it actually works and it can deliver. And so far, it hasn't delivered. Let us look at nature-based solutions. The UN Secretary General said a few days ago, we have to stop waging the war against nature. But that's what we are constantly doing. We are talking about responding to climate change, and we are doing everything possible to make sure that the problem runs away further from us. So there is a lot of, if I may say so, double standard in how we respond to climate change. We are saying we have to adapt, and then promises are made, and then the funds are not delivered. I find it absolutely staggering that we still haven't agreed on a definition of climate finance. So some country will say that we have given you 100 billion, 80 billion, and then someone like Oxfam will come and say, no, the figure is actually 20 or 25 billion. So we need to resolve those issues. We need to build trust. So if a country says it's going to pledge X billion dollars, it should be delivered. It shouldn't be deferred by another 2 years or 3 years. And again, if we talk about democracy, I'm taking the liberty because, this is a platform between friends. We talk about democracy, but there is no democracy when it comes to the UNFCCC process. We haven't yet agreed on a rules of procedure. So how does the UNFCCC process work? Is the lowest common denominator. What everyone can agree, where will there be a full stop, where will there be a comma, where will there be a semicolon? So that is the text that is adopted. So how can you have this very regimented consensus approach when you're confronted with a climate emergency, which requires bold action, decisive action? So I think the next 50 years is a great opportunity for us to show how partnerships can deliver. And I think the US and Bangladesh are well positioned to do that. Bangladesh has done an amazing, I think they've done something really exceptional over the past few years. And I give full credit to our government and our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. We are in good terms with all of the countries, all of the major countries, all at the same time. And how have we done that? We have not tried to take a position of, I am pro the Soviet Union, or I'm pro the United States, or I'm pro Japan, or I'm pro China, I'm pro India, pro Pakistan, whatever. The guiding principle was, I'm pro Bangladesh. So what is good for Bangladesh, we are going to do. And I think the results that we see today are because of that. Bangladesh has matured. We have gone up to that level. So we will be humble, but there will be force in what we say. There will be logic in what we say. And that is the logic that will help us overcome many of the obstacles that we face. Anyway, the problem with public representatives is when you give them such a nice platform and such comfortable surroundings, they will go on talking forever, and then you will have to arrange for dinner. Let me finish on a very positive note. I think for me it's been an extremely rewarding experience. I've learned so much. So much of the misconception has actually been cleared up. This is not a military alliance, as the ambassador said. This is not meant to single any particular country, and let us be clear, the message is China. A lot of people feel that the actions that are being taken are there to counterbalance the emergence of China. But I think it was very, very clear by the ambassador this morning that that is not it. Yes, we want to have a rules-based order. I think that's important. We all realize that. Bangladesh has, in fact, been the beneficiary of that. When we went to the UN Convention on Laws of the Seas, we settled our maritime disputes with Myanmar and India. So rule of law has actually come there. So we didn't have to go to war. We were actually able to do it. So Bangladesh, I think, is a perfect example, and we are the perfect candidate to take this process forward. So as we look forward to the next 50 years, and we think about what is the type of Bangladesh that we are going to leave behind for our future generations, for the new generation, I sincerely hope it's going to be a Bangladesh which is going to be as per the aspirations of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He wanted to see a progressive, a prosperous, a secular Bangladesh, a Bangladesh that met the aspirations of all, the basic necessities of life as provision for in our constitution. And by ensuring that we leave that Bangladesh behind as a legacy for future generations, I believe we will have paid the right respect to our father of the nation. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to continuing the engagement. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, Chirai Bangladesh.
That was a brilliant, valedictory oration that I've heard after a long time. And from me, it deserves a standing ovation. With that, all that's left is, as the organizing partner of this event, we delivered, the Vice Chancellor delivered the welcome. And as the supporting partner, I request Charlena Hussein Morgan, the cultural attaché of the US Embassy, to deliver her final vote of thanks.
How about now? There we go. Okay, it's hard to give a vote of thanks at the end of a very long day with such incredible speeches, but I will try my best and I will try to keep it very brief. But thank you so much. Really, as a vote of thanks for this session, it's really also a vote of thanks on behalf of the U.S. Embassy for this whole incredible day of such diverse voices, really reinforcing the messages that we, as was already reiterated by the summation of our ambassador, Peter Haas's remarks this morning, talking about how an inclusive rules-based order really is the pinnacle and the point of what we look at the next 50 years of bilateral relations, but also the underpinning of the Indo-Pacific strategy. I could not even start to list all the people that I know we have to say thank you to who made this incredible, not just this one session, but this whole day happened so successfully. But of course, to start off with the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies, Ambassador Tariq Karim, Dr. Ahmadul Islam, who was here, I think, and then had to, I'm sure, duck out. And of course, the entire Independent University Bangladesh team and the partnerships that went into many coordination calls with 2 different waves of COVID. We met, Dr. Islam is behind, I see him now, and I know that we had so many moments where we almost pulled the trigger, and then we're finally here. So I know it must be an emotional day for you to be able to finally have this event in person. So really kudos to you all for making this happen. It sounds so simple, but really in this day and age, I think it should really be applauded with such high esteem. And for really, when I think about the young people who are here at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening, I should say thank you to you for being here and for listening not only to these esteemed speakers, but I know I've had so many opportunities to have the privilege to meet the various young members of the Global Gatekeepers Club, and you all are really the future of what our esteemed speakers have been talking about. So yeah, you should please stand up and you should give yourselves a round of applause for all of the hard work you did to make this event happen. I'm constantly amazed by the work you guys all do, so really keep it up, and I hope to be able to see more events that you all host. This is not the first one I've seen you guys at, so kudos. And really to keep it brief, when I think about our esteemed guests who spoke today, Dr. Yasmin, Dr. Shahab Inam Khan, Ambassador Shams, Ambassador Soban, and of course, His Excellency Sabar Hossain Chaudhry, you all gave such rousing, inspiring words that we at the embassy, as we celebrate April 4th, it's really an important milestone for us. 50 years of bilateral relations is not just about government-to-government ties. It's about people-to-people relations. And that's the business that I'm also in at the embassy. And so it really warms my heart when I hear Dr. Rizvi earlier speaking about that powerful connection. We have many alumni on the stage here now and who have been coordinating this event. And when we think about 50 years and what, Mr. Chaudhry mentioned about what do we want to see the next 50 years? That is the most important question that we all must mull over, not just for bilateral relations, but this inclusive regional collaboration and cooperation. And so I will quickly crib from what Ambassador Haas mentioned this morning, which is every defining issue of the 21st century runs through this region, the Indo-Pacific. The climate crisis, global health, the future of technology, and whether nations will be free to chart their own path. That must be emphasized. So in order to tackle these challenges, we really need to look at how we can work together, and not just at the national level, as so many have said, but at a regional level and beyond. So I really hope that we can look to the next 50 years of keeping these engaged youth to be really at the forefront of these challenges and finding some creative solutions that we all can really be proud of. So thank you very much for an incredible day, and thank you IUB and Center of Bay of Bengal Studies.
So thank you so much, Ms. Sharina. So we are also grateful to you. So I would like to mention one big name in here. He's the Mr. Justin. So please stand up. It's all idea about Justin, and he helped me a lot. And John Dunham, yes. So we are very close to finish our event. Just we'll take picture. So Mr. John Dunham and Justin, please come to the stage. And we also would like to hear David Taylor, Professor David Taylor, please. And our very distinguished guest, Rear Admiral Khurshid Alam. Please, sir. Please come to the stage. Ji, sir. Last word. Rihanna, please. It's okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And that you have the courage and the patience to come in the morning, come back again. It's taking the whole day, but you deserve a host of things. Thank you very much. I'm not going to go for it. What is the last 4 days with
Must be.
Must be.
কেউ আছে আপনার?
আমি আজকে নিয়ে আসবেন?